Hello learners and viewers, welcome to this session. Today's topic is development facets and issues. I am Dr. G. Uma, faculty in the School of Gender and Development Studies. This topic is part of the course 2, that is MGS 002 as part of the program MA Gender and Development Studies. Let us discuss about this topic. Before that, I would like to talk about the block 1 of this course. This block 1 titled as Development Facets and Issues. Specifically under this block that today we discuss about the unit 1, that is the Integrated Sustainable Development Goals. How these goals, it's very important to address the various development issues, and after formulating the goals, whether these goals have addressed the gender issues or not, these are the few pertinent questions today we are going to discuss in this session. This block 1 has 5 units. The unit 1, as I have already mentioned, it is the Integrated Sustainable Development Goals. Unit 2 is about the education, development goals and upgradation of skills. Unit 3 is about the enhancing economic resources and SOG movement. Unit 4 also, it talks about the SOG movement, and the last one is at the regulatory framework. Regulatory framework is that in the era of market economy, there are various international laws that regulate the international trade between the countries. So in the unit 5, we specifically discuss about how these existing regulatory frameworks address the gender issues, whether these regulatory frameworks could able to integrate the women in the market economy or not. Let us start the unit 1, that is the Integrated Sustainable Development Goals. In the context of international development or global development, there is no defined concept about the development. Basically, when we talk about the international development or local development, we need to understand that it is a holistic concept and it is a multidisciplinary concept, and basically it addresses the human development, that is the development of greater quality of life for human beings. That is the important thing. Thus, when we talk about development, it encompasses governance, healthcare, education, gender equality, disaster preparedness, infrastructure, economy of the both global and national as well as local economy, human rights and environment and other issues associated with the human development. These are the broader areas the development encompasses at the international level. The international organizations like United Nations and other organizations like the World Bank and ILO, International Labour Organizations, and transnational organizations on like transnational level organization and regional level organizations like Asian Development Bank and other organizations, they try to address the issues at the international level. When they address the issues at the international level, the countries which are part of these organizations, they try to accept the resolutions passed at the international conventions and conferences. Once they accept the resolutions passed at the international convention and conferences, they could able to formulate necessary policies and programs at the national level to address these issues. For example, if you talk about the governance. Governance encompasses various factors, including at the local level, national level, and international level. When it comes to national and subnational level and local level, the governance, it's about not about the institutions. It's about how these institutions carry forward and address the various issues. That is the one thing about the governance. The second is about how these institutions are more inclusive in nature. That is the main reason the government of India could able to provide the reservation for women and other marginalized sections of the population. If you look at the reservation for women at the local level, already we have 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and most of the women, they could able to perform, they could able to address the women's issues and other gender and marginalized people's issues at the local level by looking at their contribution at the local level. Now the government has provided the reservation for women and other marginalized sections of the population at the national and subnational level. So it's like when it comes to healthcare, whether the women and other marginalized sections of the population, do they have access to health facilities or not? And with regard to education, due to the government policies and right to education, within each village, they have the at least primary schools within the 3-kilometer radius of their locality. Since women and marginalized sections of the population, they could able to access the schools, the women, they have more freedom and they could exercise their agencies to decide and to send their children, specifically girl children, to the schools. Like that, we at the international conventions and conferences, we could able to address the gender equality, disaster preparedness, various infrastructure issues, and economy at the various levels, human rights, environment, and other issues related to development. Thus, international development is different from a simple development. It's specifically composed of institutions, as I have already mentioned, and policies that arose after the Second World War. When we talk about these institutions, specifically international and multinational and transnational institutions, focus on alleviating poverty and improving living conditions in third world decolonized countries. Now we are not calling as third world decolonized countries, now we are calling as developing countries and underdeveloped countries. When we talk about the policies after the Second World War, here one must understand that after the Second World War, most of the developed nations, they got affected and their infrastructure is heavily damaged due to the Second World War. At the same time, countries like in India, many third world countries, specifically now what we call as developing nations, they got independence immediately after the Second World War. Second World War got over in 1945, and like country like in India, we got an independence in 1947. So once the third world countries, they got an independence, they need to address various issues, including improvement of the infrastructure, as well as they need to address the socio-economic issues, and they need to address the issues of the marginalized and other communities. And few, like in a third world countries, unlike developed nations, they face various development issues. Poverty is the major issues among when you analyze the poverty can have a differential impact on male, female, and other genders differently. And poverty can have an impact differently in the urban areas and rural areas. Due to the existing patriarchal nature, and the poverty among female are very high. This was proved through the existing data. Around 60% of the female in a specific group, they were in the state of poverty. Compared to male members, it has a differential impact. Like when we analyze the poverty, it has a gender differential impact that we need to understand that. So that decolonized countries, they not only need to address the issues of infrastructure and economy at the national and various levels, they need to address the socio-economic issues like poverty, gender issues, and the issues of marginalized and differences in the development at the rural and urban areas, and they are forced to improve their economy to generate more employment, to looking at the issues of third world countries. The United Nations not only address the issues of conflict between two countries, it started addressing the various development issues. So the international development, on the other hand, seeks to implement long-term solutions to problems by helping developing countries to create the necessary capacity needed to provide such as sustainable solutions to their problems. So in order to reduce their problems, specifically in the developing countries, the international organizations have organized many conventions, conferences for the well-being of the human beings. That we need to understand that. Second, these conventions and conferences may consist of single agenda or multi agendas. Basically, these conventions, they have a specific goals, and these goals are very transformative in nature to address the specific problem or series of goals targeted at several aspects in the society. These goals were promoted specifically to address the issues that specifically address the specific culture, politics, geography and economy of the region. So these goals can be we can consider these goals as an international in nature, but when you look at these goals are specific to particular region or particular countries. For an example, we could able to see that when you talk about education, if you look at the education or healthcare facilities, if you take India as an example for education and healthcare facilities, one could able to see that the availability of healthcare is more region specific or specific location specific. So it is therefore the country has to improve the healthcare facilities at the rural areas, then only. And when you talk about the healthcare facilities, even if the healthcare facilities also available, the access to healthcare facilities specifically gender in nature. Like male, they could able to access, but when it comes to female, they may, it is difficult for them to access healthcare due to the lack of infrastructure and like for example restrictions of their mobility and lack of enough resources to access healthcare facilities. That is the main reason that the government has to improve the healthcare facilities at the rural areas, and they need to improve the many primary health centers which can be very accessible to women and other marginalized sections of the population. Even children also, they could be able to access these facilities. That is the importance. So if you look at the international convention and conferences, these international conventions and conferences, the focus has been apart from focusing various development issues, the specific focus is on empowering women and children and building local economy and caring for the environment. Many countries from different parts of the world were the member of these conventions and conferences. For example, if you talk about specifically about the UN Action for Women, United Nations concern for the advancement of women began around 75 years ago. With the United Nations has founded in 1945. In its charter itself, the members of the UN declare their faith in fundamental human rights and in the equal rights of men and women. Since then, UN action for the advancement of women has taken 4 clear directions. One is the promotion of legal measures, mobilization of public opinion and international action, research and training, and direct assistance to disadvantaged groups. These are the 4 clear directions UN has taken. Because of it has specifically, it wants to concentrate the advancement of women. The United Nations decided to concentrate these 4 areas. Like for example, with regard to promotion of legal rights. Many UN conventions and conferences, it talked about the various treaties to help to define women's human rights, and whoever committed to honor these treaties and conventions, they have taken various legal measures at the national level, and they promoted equal rights for the women, and also the women, they could able to access legal services to protect their own human rights. Like that, there are various conventions for gender and development, conventions against discrimination in education, convention on consent to marriage, minimum age for marriage and registration of marriages in 1962, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is the SIDA Convention, and Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. These are the few conventions I am mentioning about that. Specifically, we need to discuss about the one convention, that is the SIDA Convention. These SIDA Conventions, it is an international convention adopted in 18th December 1979 by the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. It is an international bill of rights for women. It came into force on 3rd September 1981. 186 countries are the members of this convention. The main goal of the convention is to reduce and to eradicate the discrimination against women and to promote gender equity. When you look at these conventions, that is the Declaration of Elimination of Violence Against Women in this international SIDA convention, SIDA wants to support the many countries to address the various issues. Specifically, the SIDA has wants to the many countries, including India, they agreed to SIDA convention, and India is also the party for the SIDA convention. As per SIDA convention, the discrimination against any women, I quote, any distinction, exclusion or restriction made on the basis of sex which has an effect or the purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment or exercise by women irrespective of their marital status on the basis of equality of men and women, of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil or any other field. I unquote. This quote clearly establishes that agenda of action for putting an end to sex-based discrimination. This SIDA convention was constituted with the experts of women's issues from different UN member states. This committee, they will meet once in a year to review the reports on compliance with the convention's provisions that the statutory in nature are required to submit every 4 years. When you look at the SIDA conventions, even as I have already mentioned, India also party to the SIDA conventions. The members of these SIDA conventions, they meet once in a year, twice in a year, and they review the existing provisions in the SIDA convention. Based on the review, they come to the conclusion whether the member states are compliance with the SIDA, whatever they have signed in the SIDA treaty, whether they could be able to implement the convention's resolution in their own countries. Apart from submission of report to the UN by the member states, other non-governmental organizations, other civil society organizations, they could also prepare, they were allowed to prepare the report regarding the implementation of the SIDA conventions in their respective countries. So these civil society organizations, they were allowed to submit their report in the United Nations. Thus the SIDA, based on the SIDA convention, most of these member countries, they could able to implement various provisions as per SIDA. Basically, SIDA convention clearly pointed out that based on the sex, no one should be discriminated. Even as per our Indian Constitution, Indian Constitution clearly points out that there is we should not discriminate on the basis of sex. That is the another important. So one is about the discrimination. Second one is that as per SIDA conventions, the member states, they need to formulate necessary policies and programs to implement the SIDA convention. That is the next important is that apart from these SIDA conventions, the UN, United Nations, it has organized 4 international world conferences. The first conferences happened in Mexico City in 1975. The second international women conferences held in Copenhagen. Third one is in Nairobi in 1985 and fourth is the 1995. If you look at these 4 conferences, in the beginning, United Nations could able to convene the conferences once in 5 years. After Nairobi conference, it took a decade to convene the international conference for women in Beijing in 1995. The first conference, world conference in 1995 held by looking at the existing status of women and existing status of women in the areas of education, health, and access to various resources, and their representation in macroeconomy by looking at the women's labor force participation. Then the UN came to the conclusion that it is important to organize the international conferences to address the issues of the women. By looking at the women's status and position, the first conference was held in Mexico City. In that first conference, the feminists, they have proposed the women in development theoretical understanding. As per women in development theory, the existing studies clearly point out that the women are not properly integrated in the public spaces. It is pertinent to take necessary efforts to integrate women into the public spaces. Specifically, they have to be integrated in the economy, education, and other various sectors. Once they get integrated, once they could able to earn like a male members, once they could able to control and access and control over resources, the feminists thought that their status and position automatically improve. That's why they have proposed the women in development approach. As per the women in development approach, many countries, including India, they could able to formulate necessary policies and programs to improve the women's status and position. Next conference was held in Copenhagen in 1980. In these Copenhagen conferences, not only women in development, the feminists, they have proposed the after studying the implementation of women in development, they came to the conclusion that it is not that women has not integrated in the macroeconomy. They have integrated, but they have integrated in a very unequal manner due to the existing patriarchy and socialization process. So it is important to address the existing gender and social relations. Once we could able to address the gender and social relations, then we could able to address these existing unequal relations. The third conference held in Nairobi, that is the very significant conference. We call it as the birth of global feminism in 1985. In this conference, there is a two kinds of discussion was held. Then specifically in the third International Women's Conference in Nairobi, the feminists from third world countries, they have formed a separate group, and they have formed the group called Dawn to address the various issues faced by the women in the third world countries, because the women from the feminists from the developed nations, they were talked about only rights of the women, but the feminists from the third world countries, they realized that along with the rights, the women in the third world countries, they are facing like various issues, various structural issues that needs to be addressed. Finally, the last conference was held in Beijing. In that Beijing conference, very significant proposal was submitted, that is the birth of the gender and development approach. As per after analyzing the various approaches and its implementation and analyzing the women's status and position, in the Beijing conference, the feminists, they have proposed the alternative approach, that is called gender and development approach. In that gender and development approach, the feminists, they have proposed that it is not about that the women have integrated unequally, but it is significant to address the existing gender relations. Once we could able to address the existing gender relations through various tools and other policies and programs, we could able to alter the gender relations. It is important to alter the existing gender relations to bring the equity and equality in the society. These are the 4 international conferences. Through these conferences, the international organization could able to bring the various perspectives to integrate the women into the existing development process and to address the various issues faced by the women. Other development convention and conferences include International Conference on Population and Development, Millennium Development Goals in 2000, and Sustainable Development Goals in 2020. So if you look at these development goals, these international conventions and conferences specifically organize to address the various issues, including gender issues. Whoever party to these international conferences, they need to take an appropriate policies and programs at the national level to address these issues. Thank you so much for listening to this session. We will meet again to address to discuss next block. Thank you.
Are you interested in television journalism or radio journalism or online journalism? Or do you want to learn with the flexibility of open learning? Or if you are a working professional, wants to enhance your knowledge and skill with certification in the field of electronic media, then School of Journalism and New Media Study, Ignou, offers PG Diploma in Electronic Media for you. This program includes audio and audio-visual program production for radio, television and online platforms. Here are some important details about the program. We have total 8 courses of 32 credits, 6 theory courses, 1 practical and 1 project. Eligibility: bachelor's degree in any subject. Minimum duration 1 year, maximum 3 years. Medium is English but students can write their examinations, assignments, practical and project in Hindi also. So if you are interested in television, radio or online media, please come and join Ignou's PG Diploma in Electronic Media.
Hello students. Today we are going to discuss an introduction to gender sensitization, society and culture. This course is offered in CBCS, BA in general and also in BSc and other bachelor's degree which the university is offering. This is in fact offered by School of Gender and Development Studies and the code is BGDD 172. Today we have with me Dr. G. Uma, who is co-coordinator, and I'm Dr. Smita, who is also coordinator of this course. So today we are going to discuss, in fact, in this introduction, what is the content of this course, how do we go about it, how you can, in fact, study apart from this material. So we are broadly going to go and discuss what is the content and how you should study about it. As you know, gender sensitization is one of the very important and the significant area which we all need to discuss. And it's not about the discussion, it's also about that how do you approach gender in your everyday life, how do you understand the society and how you can, sort of bring out a society which would be gender sensitive society, where through that you can you can individually engage and bring out changes in the society. So let us discuss about this particular course, gender sensitization, society and culture, and I would request Dr. G. Uma to take it forward.
Hello learners and listeners, welcome to this session. This is part of the, as my co-coordinator told, it is part of this BA program, BA, BSc and BA Honours program. This course has 6 blocks. The block 1, we have introduced the various concepts related to gender sensitization, and we have started with the basic concepts like difference between sex and gender. So most of you may not be aware about these differences. Basically, it's when you talk about the sex is a biological difference. When it comes to gender, many of you have directly come from school and they joined in the BA program. You must be wondering what is socialization. Why do we talk about the gender differences? When we talk about gender, is it only we are talking about the women, or we are talking about other genders and male members also? These, and apart from this difference between these two concepts, we have also explained about what is patriarchy. Most of us may not aware about, at the undergraduate level, may not aware about the patriarchy. Even if someone is explain about the patriarchy, you may not be know how patriarchy really operates in the society. So in the first block, not only in the unit 1, it talks about the various concepts related to gender sensitization. Further blocks, it is introduced the other sexuality concept related to sexualities, and we have talked about the patriarchy, and one unit it talks about the gender socialization, why this is socialization happening. So I request Dr. Smita Patil to take further in rest of the blocks what was discussed in this course.
Yeah, the block 1 title as a conceptualizing gender, as Dr. Uma explained to you that in the unit 1, which is dealing with, in fact, the concept, the basic concept like sex and gender, patriarchy, masculinity, femininity, feminism, public and private spheres, and in which that you are sort of going to engage with certain ideas, right? You would see that the ways in which the society in fact engages with it. For instance, in order to understand these debates, the unit 2 which is linked with this, which is called particularly as a gender and sexualities, in which you are supposed to be introduced with the social construction of sexuality. Now sexuality is something which is socially constructed. As you in the unit 1 you read about these debates on sex and gender, but then it's a profound definition, but how a construction of the sexuality which takes place in the society very lucidly explained through the various examples to make you understand. So through this that you are broadly going to go and understand the concept of patriarchy and the framework of patriarchy, but then how sexuality plays an important role in the life of the people. At the same time, that the ways in which that when one talks about this social construction, sexuality, and the sexuality construction of sexuality, you're going to introduce with these categories that how it has been defined. At the same time that sexuality and the gender which is related. Like for instance, I'll give an example that it is categorized a category of good woman or bad woman. Who defines that? Who categorizes that? It would be introduced to you in a very specific manner. How society carries forward, as in the block unit 1 that you would learn about the gender stereotyping. So here you will analyze those debates further, and therefore it's very important to understand these debates. Unit 3, which is dealing with the concept of masculinity. Now masculinity is something which you have to understand how it is again been constructed in the society, the ways in which that masculinity is defined. There is of course a construction, but then you need to also understand the patriarchy, the difference between the patriarchy and masculinities. For instance, when you talk about the patriarchy, it's a further step ahead where you are going to be introduced with the debate of the masculinity. Now masculinity, when one talks about that, different cultures define masculinity in a different manner, right? For instance, that you will relate these debates further, the concept of masculinity in relation with the violence. And today you see in every society there is a violence because of the masculinity, and it's a woman who suffer end of the day most of the time. I mean, now it again been that these concepts are changing through over a period of time, which you are going to be introduced to through these debates in the society through these lenses, men, women, and beyond those gender. Like for instance, that the LGBTQ community, which is also part of the society, how that the masculine behavior is there in the society, which as a result you see that they face the violence. In the unit 4, gender in everyday life, you are going to introduce with the process of the gender construction in relation with the culture and ordering in the society. As you know that we live in a hierarchical society. the society which is unequal society. There is a power relation between the society, and you would see that the categories of class, caste, gender, and so on, which is based on that. But how do you see this category of gender in everyday life? For instance, that you would examine that what are the implication of the gender construction in relation to the development indicators, and for instance, like sex segregation, division of labor, decision making, socialization. To cite one example, that division of labor, you can just go around and see whether a division of labor in the public space or in the private space. Take an example of your mother, how much labor she does at home also, but is it recognized? So you are supposed to get into this debate to understand this. At the same time, one has to also look into the in relation with this the gender and structural arrangement in the society, how these structures are formulated, who formulates this structure. So you have to sort of investigate these debates in order to understand the universal position of the gender construction. Now I would request Dr. Gyan to take it forward.
Then the second block is about gender and family. We must understand that there are various social structures operate in the society. Family is one of the very significant structure. When all of us, we think that family is a very significant, and we need to society as well as the existing patriarchal institutions want to maintain the family. But when you deeply analyze this family, the feminist clearly given a theoretical not only theoretical, they did various studies, and they explained that family as an institution, there is an unequal relationship exists in the family structures. So the unit starts with explaining the nature and functions of the family and various norms of marriage in India. Like family is related to marriage as an institution. As I have already mentioned, the unit also talk about the critically looked at how the subordination and hierarchy operates within the family as a structure, even in the marriages also. So these, from a feminist perspective, we could able to explain in the unit family and marriage. That is the part of the block 2. In the block 2 also
unit 5. I'll just add on that, as Dr. Gyan just said to you, that the theoretical framework. Now for instance, that the family is something which that how a liberal feminist look at this debate, how socialist and Marxist feminists are looking at this debate, and how radically. Like for instance, the liberal feminist says that there are no rights given to the woman, and then therefore they have to go in a public spaces and sort of demand those. The family should allow, but then the family itself is not allowing to them to go out. In the case of socialist and Marxist feminists, the production of labor, which is a very important debate, again the question of labor, that the economy is the sole criteria which feminists, Marxists and socialist feminists are talking about. At the same time, if you further tease out Suleiman Firestone's work, or in that case Kate Millett also, those who are radical feminists, you would categorically see that these feminists are saying that no, the important thing is that to tease out here is that within family there is of course a patriarch in all of them, but the important key factor which radical feminists is that sexuality of the woman, which is there, and therefore they are sort of exploited within family. In fact, that if you are interested, you must also look at this book, very interesting books by Marxist feminist Catherine McKinnon, or you can have a look at Patricia Wolbe's book, Theorizing Patriarchy, to understand again, in a deeper manner. At the same time that as we have seen that in the marriages, because the marriage system itself is a very oppressive in nature, so therefore it's very important that in block 2 to understand this debate. The concept of motherhood, which is discussed in the unit 6 of the block 2, in which that you are going to critically sort of engage with this concept of motherhood, which is sort of gender roles in India, and to locate the motherhood within the cross-culture context of patriarchal and capitalist structure. At the same time that these debates, like for instance the concept of motherhood also is changing if you minutely observe it. Like for instance the example of the surrogacy, which is we have given to you, that surrogate mother, IVF, and so forth, that how technology is bringing a change. For instance, if there is a single woman or a woman by choice doesn't want to give a birth to the children, but how society treats to them. So that is something which you have to also try to understand, the woman who is not put into the category of the mother or the motherhood, how the society, is there a change happening? So you have to think that in these aspects also. At the same time that the class caste, which is structuring, and the urban-rural society which we live in India, we need to also understand. At the same time, the reproductive rights and the surrogacy, which I have mentioned to you, you need to understand and engage it very critically in the context of the contemporary transition, which is there, which has again been a link with culture and economy. Now, Dr. Uma will take over and explain block 3.
Block 3 is about gender and work. Specifically, as a learners, once you understood the existing differences between male and female, and for the first 2 blocks, first is about the concepts and gender socialization. Second is about the various social structures. Once you clearly understood these things, third is about the work. This is about the public sphere as well as private sphere. So first we need to define what is work and what are the traditional contemporary discourses related work, and how to measure work. That is very important. And what is the reason for existing gender gap in the labor force participation? Why do women experience discrimination at the workspaces? That is very important. And unit 8 is about gender issues in work and labor market. Specifically, this unit talks about the women's issues in the labor market and employment, and examine the implications of gender on labor and employment of women. If you look at these 2 things, first unit, it talks about both the work they performed, the women, whatever the work performed by the women, both at the public and private sphere, that is explained in the unit 7. That is after defining the work and how the feminist has differentiated the various kinds of work. Like for example, the women, they perform productive, reproductive and socially enforce certain activities. When it comes to productive work, that may directly related to the whatever the work perform, that after you perform, you may get certain financial benefit. When it comes to reproductive work, now bearing the children and rearing of the children, rearing of the elders and taking care of the elders and performing all productive activities at the household level. For example, cooking the meals, ensuring the needs of the each and every person at the household level. So the various, how the feminist has differentiated these various kinds of work performed by the women. What is the reasons for not for not giving value to the women's work at the private space. Yeah, and when you value and you measure the women's work, even we have used time use survey and various tools the feminists have designed and developed. If you look at the work, if you look at the studies based on this time use survey, on an average, the women, they have performed 4 hours more than any male perform. Most of the males, they perform only 6 to 8 hours at the public spaces, and they rarely they contribute for the reproductive work. The women, they are performing both productive reproductive work.
Yes.
Apart from that productive and reproductive work, they may perform certain community assigned certain works. For example, they were forced to attend certain community programs, functions. Even most of the families, male, they don't go for marriages and other functions. Then the women, they were forced to attend those community assigned certain activities. So altogether, if you look at their hours of work, they may work they may work around 40 or 50% more than what the male performed in the society. But here one important aspects we need to understand, that even though women, they contribute so much for various activities, but most of the time we are neither we are valuing their work nor we are recognizing their work. That our learners, we need to understand that, and we need to take it forward how to recognize their work, how to give the value to their work by taking certain measures at the various level. That is very important. That was explained clearly in this block.
The next block is in fact dealing with health and gender, in which that the reproductive health and the rights are, sort of explained. For instance, that it's very important to understand, because this is something, a negligible area, which you could see in that unless that the feminists did the intervention in this, like for instance that how one should look at the reproductive rights and the rights of the woman. For instance, that the reproductive health, there are certain indicators to that, and you have to understand that, explore, and how those international conventions and their roles, the whole history, that how the reproductive rights, the reproductive health, this debate emerged from historical till now. What are those approaches which eventually developed by many of the feminists to make sure that, and at the same time, the child health policy which is there. So it is not only in the Indian context, but at the international level, which you are going to, sort of read and understand these debates in a very critical fashion. At the same time, that the next unit of this block, which is dealing with gender and disability. Now, how do you define disability? At the same time that there are certain stereotypes regarding the disability or the disabled person, which is there, which the society in fact constructed, and there are certain kind of attitudes of the society. So you are sort of going to engage with this debate and tease out, is it a right or a wrong? So you have to think about it and be very sensitive, which you are sort of going to understand that. Then what is the relationship between the gender and disability? Because a boy who is a disabled and a girl is disabled, there again been a segregation which society has done. So you are going to learn about this again, and at the same time that the disabled body, which there always many times in a society sort of experience the violence, and the violence is not from also outside, it's also from the inside, it's also from the family members. It's so how they have been treated, what are the laws are there, how they can articulate their voice, in what way that you can sort of engage in the society with the disabled bodies. That is what something which you are going to learn through this particular course. The next block, which is their gender, law and society, and the unit 11 is gender-based violence. Now, gender-based violence in the society, not only in India but across the world is increasing. There are multiple ways which one can sort of offer a critique to it, but at the same time that we should know this concept, what does it mean gender-based violence. At the same time that there are different illustration and forms of the gender-based violence and in public and private you would see that gender-based violence which is happening across the world. And what are the consequences and causes of this violence? At the same time, how we are, what are the ways in which one is responding, one is sort of, dealing, addressing this issue through law and social action. As you know that there are different forms of the violence which in the society, and we all of us could see that. You just open the newspaper or a media TV channel, you would see that a number of violences which are happening now, and in the most recent time you would also see that the violence which is happening, that because the young generation which is there in a social media, so those forms of violence are also changing. So gender-based violence is not only now related with this thing, the new technology which is there, which has a good and bad both effects. But how do you see that, and how you are going to address? What are those laws? Are you aware with that laws? Like for instance, cyber crimes are happening. Are you aware with that? How you are going to go and engage with that? So this is not only that you are particularly going to engage with the gender-based violence, but you have to also think critically in what are the ways things are changing fast in the contemporary society. At the same time, the sexual harassment at the workplace, which is the next unit of this block, in which you are going to introduce with the sexual harassment at workplace. And I'm sure that you must be knowing about Sexual Harassment at Workplace 2013 Act, in which that what kind of forms are there? How do we define sexual violence at workplace? And in India and elsewhere, how it has seen. At the same time that there are various ways in which one would look at this debate. And the final block which is dealing with this is a gender representation and media, in which the unit 13 gender and language is there, and Dr. Uma will sort of introduce to you with this.
First unit, this last unit also is gender representation and representation, language, media. This unit talks about the first, it starts with the difference between sex and gender and describes the gender differences in language use, and the unit will demonstrate the relationship between the gender and language. This unit also talks about the gender boundaries and social expectations to use the certain language as per socio-cultural norms. If you, as a simple example, you could able to see that most of the places they don't use the gender neutral terms. Instead of chairman, we could able to use the chairperson. That particular seat, any gender can occupy.
Yes.
So that kind of sensitivity, that kind of lack of sensitivity still prevailing in the society. So this block specifically, the language we use in public spaces, and when we write the certain language, what is the impact on gender when we use the language, and why do we need to use the right kind of gender neutral words to represent all gender irrespective of their orientation. That is very important. So the final unit, certainly it talks about how the gender has been represented in media and other mass. And when you talk about media, the unit clearly, like a unit 14 clearly discussed about what is mass media, how it influences each and every one of us, and what is the role of the mass media in representing gender, and when you read and visualize, like for example, when you read the certain text and how to read and visualize and how to understand how that particular text has represented various genders. That was clearly explained in the last unit.
By now you must be understood that these are the 6 blocks broadly talking about the several issues in relation with the work, family, marriage, the basic concepts like sex, gender, sexuality, and so on. At the same time, that media's representation, work, and there are different aspects of the language in which you can sort of engage with that. So after reading that, you can sort of engage with the society and see around what is going on and critically think about this. I'm sure that that you have listened this our lecture what we just now discussed, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We welcome you to join the bouquet of programs offered by the School of Humanities, the Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. The Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi is a mega university today. It was created by an Act of Parliament in 1985. It is the world's largest university with an enrollment of about 3.5 million current students and 3.2 million alumni. Ignou has also been accorded the highest grade of academic excellence, A++, by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, or the NAC. Now, during your time at Ignou as a learner, we will help you complete your program of study with world-class printed materials, audio and video programs. We have more than 35,000 academic counselors who will guide you till you complete your program of study. We also provide live interaction with your teachers at the headquarters via teleconferencing mode, and live interactive radio counseling besides this, supported by regular TV and radio broadcasts. The School of Humanities was created in 1988, and we welcome you warmly to join any of our programs of study. Ignou degrees, diplomas and certificates are recognized not only in the country but are also very well received across the globe. We look forward to your journey with us, and we welcome you once again. The School of Humanities of the Indira Gandhi National Open University offers more than 26 ODL programs, which is open and distance learning programs, and now more than 10 online programs. A very interesting feature that we have, a very interesting program that we have on offer right now is the BA English Honours. Now, in this particular program, what we've done is we've taken a large number of courses from English, which means is English as a discipline. And then we have also put in other interdisciplinary and skill-based.
Good afternoon, learners. Welcome you all again to this session. Today I will be talking on a particular topic, that is Agrobacterium tumefaciens-mediated plant transformation. Now this topic, it belongs to BBYET 143, Economic Botany and Biotechnology, Plant Biotechnology, Unit number 14, Section 14.7, Methods of Genetic Engineering. Now there it is mentioned Agrobacterium tumefaciens under this particular topic, which I am going to discuss in a little bit elaborate fashion. Now in some of my earlier sessions, I discussed on how to generate transgenic plants. And I discussed what are the different applications of the genetic engineering technique in plants. But when you are creating a transgenic plant or generating a transgenic plant, the first and the foremost tool or the technology that you use is vector-mediated gene delivery system. And for the vector-mediated gene delivery system, you have to go through this Agrobacterium tumefaciens-mediated plant transformation. Now, this Agrobacterium tumefaciens, first of all, we have to learn about the nature of Agrobacterium tumefaciens, and then what is actually there in Agrobacterium tumefaciens that enables it to be utilized in plant transformation. Because till date, there is no other bacteria that has been utilized for the purpose of plant transformation, excepting Agrobacterium tumefaciens or maybe Agrobacterium rhizogenes. So we have to understand what is there in Agrobacterium tumefaciens that makes it the sole candidate or the sole representative to be utilized in creating transgenics or in plant biotechnology. Now, Agrobacterium is regarded as the nature's genetic engineer because it is just, as you can see in the picture, it is a rod-shaped soil bacteria. It is a bacteria which is present in the soil or soil bacterium. It's a rod-shaped bacteria, and it is not merely a bacteria because it has become now a household name in plant genetic engineering or in plant molecular biology. Because as I said, if you are to generate a transgenic plant through vector-mediated system, then there is no other option than to use this particular bacterium. So this has become almost a fundamental item in research in plant biotechnology or in plant molecular biology. The story began almost 100 years ago when two plant pathologists, Irving Smith and Charles Townsend, published a paper in Science. It's a very well-known journal, reporting that a bacterium that they named Bacterium tumefaciens caused plant tumors or crown gall. So Agrobacterium tumefaciens is a bacteria that causes crown gall tumorigenesis or crown gall tumor. The next major discoveries on Agrobacterium and crown gall in the 1940s were made at Rockefeller Institute by Armin Braun, whose interests in the system were initially sparked by a surprising observation of a student working under him studying crown gall in Germany. The student found it very difficult to isolate Agrobacterium from the tumor tissue. So the thing is that they identified that this particular bacterium is causing some abnormality in the plant, particularly Agrobacterium tumefaciens. It is causing crown gall tumorigenesis. So people went on searching what is the reason for this, and then what are the unique characteristics of this particular bacterium. Now, vector-mediated gene transfer. So what does it mean? That means gene transfer, or when you generate a transgenic plant, it can be done in two ways. Either you can undergo vector-mediated DNA delivery, or it can be direct gene transfer. Direct gene transfer means when there is no involvement of the vector. That means it can be done through particle bombardment, gene gun. It can be done through electroporation. Okay, so there are several other techniques. But when you are talking of Agrobacterium mediated transformation, you have to understand that it is a vector mediated gene delivery system or vector mediated DNA transfer. So from this it is very clear that Agrobacterium tumefaciens must have some components, must have some inbuilt components, or must have some vector within itself which actually we make use of in plant transformation. So we will have to study in details about that particular vector which is present endogenously in Agrobacterium tumefaciens. And that plasmid or that vector is known as the TI plasmid, because we already know that plasmids are a kind of vectors. So these Agrobacterium tumefaciens, they have this TI plasmid or the tumor inducing plasmid, and that is why the tumors are being generated in the plants. Now in this context, I would like to mention that in addition to Agrobacterium tumefaciens, you have another one species of Agrobacterium which is called Agrobacterium rhizogenes. And that Agrobacterium rhizogenes, it causes root mat disease, or it causes hairy root diseases, where there is a huge proliferation of the root growth and there is abnormal root formation. So we will not go into details of Agrobacterium rhizogenes today. We will be focusing our attention mostly on Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Now, Agrobacterium tumefaciens is a soil-borne gram-negative bacterium causing crown gall disease. It's a rod-shaped motile bacterium which is found in the rhizosphere. So you all know what is meant by rhizosphere. That is the region of the root which is in immediate vicinity with the soil. And there this particular bacterium is housed, or it is a resident of that particular region. But what happens is, whenever there is an wound, whenever a plant is wounded or whenever there is a damage, then you find that the crown gall formation is formed at the damaged site. Now it is not necessary that the damage has to be near the soil, near the level of the soil. It can be quite high. Like in a lofty tree, there can be a damage at quite a substantial height from the soil surface, and there the crown gall is formed. And as I said, that crown gall is caused due to Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Then you have to understand that there is some sort of movement from the soil particle to the top of the tree, and that movement, it occurs due to chemotaxis. Why chemotaxis? Because from the wounded site or from the damaged site, certain kinds of molecules are being secreted, like different kinds of sugars or certain phenolic molecules. These are being released from the damaged plant cells. And in response to those chemicals, Agrobacterium, it shows chemotactic movement, and it moves from the soil to the damaged site. And thereafter it actually colonizes at the damaged site. So these are the three species, as you can see, that is Agrobacterium tumefaciens crown gall disease, Agrobacterium rhizogenes hairy root disease, Agrobacterium radiobacter, it's an avirulent strain. Now today, as I said, I am focusing my discussion on Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Now before I begin actually the Agrobacterium tumefaciens biology, we categorize Agrobacterium tumefaciens strains into two groups, that is biotype 1 and biotype 2. Biotype 1, it includes certain strains like ACH5, B6, okay, T37 and so on. And these strains, they normally grow up to 37 degrees centigrade. But normally they grow at 28 degrees centigrade. Okay, even if you raise the temperature, they might tolerate up to 37, but not beyond that. But it is preferable that you culture them. When you are culturing them in the laboratory, then you culture them preferably at 28 degrees centigrade. And what are the media that which you can use here? You can use the Luria Botany media, which you use in case of Escherichia coli or E. coli. You can use nutrient broth, or you can use tryptone yeast extract. Now, in case of biotype 2, they have a different requirement. That is, they grow on erythritol as a carbon source. And such strains like you can see NC, PPB, 1855, A4, etc., they normally proliferate poorly at temperature higher than 30 degrees centigrade. So here the temperature range is much narrower, and hence it is preferable that it is recommended that you should grow them at 28 degree or 29 degrees centigrade. So minor fluctuations in temperature might arrest the growth of these kind of strains. So you have to be very careful regarding the maintenance of proper temperature. And they do not grow on classic E. coli media. Instead, they can be cultured on tryptone yeast extract plus calcium. So they need certain supplemented media and not the normal media which you use in case of E. coli. So these are the two strains, and you can use either of the two strains for biotype 1 or biotype 2 in case of plant transformation. Now, as I said that Agrobacterium tumefaciens, it has the tumor-inducing principle, or it has the TI plasmid. So we have to now understand very clearly what is the structure of this TI plasmid and how do you clone a particular gene in the TI plasmid, what are the different ways by which you can undergo the cloning and the transformation process, because we are utilizing this TI plasmid for plant transformation. If it is Agrobacterium rhizogenes, then they have the RI plasmid, or the as I said that that actually induces the root hair formation, hairy root disease as we say. So those rhizogenes, they have the RI plasmids. Again, I am not talking of the RI plasmid. I will be mostly talking on the TI plasmid. Now, some of the points which need to be remembered when you are undergoing Agrobacterium tumefaciens transformation in your laboratory. Number 1, continued presence of viable bacteria is not required for tumor maintenance. Once you infect the particular plant tissue, it can be callus, it can be leaf discs. Once you infect the particular tissue with Agrobacterium tumefaciens, okay, and if the Agrobacterium colonizes, okay, then it's not necessary that the Agrobacterium tumefaciens has to be present continuously. Okay, once the infection is done for a certain period of time, then you need to remove the Agrobacterium tumefaciens. Otherwise, you will not be able to regenerate the plant. You will not be able to regenerate a plant from the transformed cells. So initially, for a certain period of time, I will talk on that. For a certain period of time, you need the co-cultivation. Co-cultivation means where you are growing the Agrobacterium together with the plant tissue or the explant. And after that period is over, you have to kill the Agrobacterium tumefaciens cells and you allow the explant, transformed explant, to be regenerated. So this is number 1. Number 2, bacteria do not penetrate into plant cells that are converted to tumor cells. Number 3, rather bacteria, it penetrate into the intercellular spaces and into the injured cells and attach themselves only to the wall of the healthy plant cells. Now, what enables Agrobacterium tumefaciens to attach to the walls, we will be coming to that. Of course, it has certain genes. Okay, attachment which helps in the attachment, it has certain genes, and those genes enable the Agrobacterium tumefaciens to attach to the plant cell wall. Now take a look very carefully at this particular figure. Now this is actually the TI plasmid. So the TI plasmid has different components. As you can see, it has a right DNA border, right tDNA border. And what is tDNA? tDNA means this particular region, that is, which is present within the border sequences. So these are called the border sequences. One is the right tDNA border and another is the left tDNA border. And within this region, this particular region between these two borders are known as the tDNA region or transfer DNA region, meaning that only this portion of the DNA will be transferred into the plant cells. The rest of the portions will not be transferred. But you have to remember that the other portions are also important so far as the transformation process is concerned. It's not that these are not important, but only the tDNA region will be transferred. So the right tDNA border and the left tDNA border, within this region, within the tDNA region, you have certain hormone regulating genes, or you have certain genes which regulate hormone production like auxin and cytokinin. So auxin production and cytokinin production, and the genes which are responsible for this production are also present within the tDNA region. In addition, you have a certain component called opines. I will come to that. The opines are actually synthesized not by the bacteria, but the opines are synthesized by the infected plant cells, which enable the bacteria to grow. That means these opines, they serve as carbon and nitrogen sources for the Agrobacterium tumefaciens cells to grow. and these opines are not synthesized by Agrobacterium, rather they are synthesized by the infected plant cells for the bacterium. So the opine synthesis genes are present actually in the tDNA region, and you can see an interesting thing, that oncogenes. So by the term oncogenes, we normally mean the genes which are responsible for cancer formation. But you should be surprising that you should be surprised to see that why the oncogenes is there in this particular TI plasmid, because if there is an abnormality in the auxin and cytokinin production in the plant system, then there will be abnormality, and that is why these genes are also sometimes referred to as the oncogenes, because if these genes, they get mutated, the normal genes which regulate auxin and cytokinin production, if they get mutated, or if they become non-functional, or if they become function in an improper fashion, then that might lead to oncogenicity of the particular plant, because it might lead to abnormality. And you can imagine crown gall to be a kind of cancer. You can imagine the hairy root to be a kind of cancer in case of plants. So if the question is that do the plants have oncogenes, the answer is yes, because if there is any kind of change or mutation or any kind of abnormality in the genes which are responsible for auxin and cytokinin production, there will be a cancer formation in plant as well. So these are termed as the oncogenes. So these oncogenes are present within this particular tDNA region. And outside the tDNA region, you can see the conjugative transfer process, because the Agrobacterium will actually get transferred into the plant cells. So there should be some kind of transfer, this transfer process regulating component, and that is known as the TRA locus. Okay, that is present here, that is responsible for the conjugative transfer. Then there is a component called opine catabolism. That means opine synthesis is within the tDNA region. Opine catabolism genes are present here, that is outside the tDNA region. The origin of replication, which allows the vector to multiply within the host cell, and a very, very important component which we will focus in detail, that is the virulence region. That means it has almost 8 virulence genes, or the VIR genes, and these VIR genes, they do not they act from outside. That is, they allow this tDNA region to be entered or to gain entry into the plant cells, but themselves they do not get entry into the plant cell. So with this picture in our background, we will try to focus on each of these components in a little bit further detail, how they are being regulated, and what function do they precisely regulate during the transformation process. So number one, only a small part of the tDNA, only a small part of the tumor-inducing plasmid is being transferred. That is, only the tDNA region will be transferred. Now this tDNA region, it contains genes for hormone synthesis, that is auxin and cytokinin, and the biosynthesis of novel plant metabolites called opines. Now opines can be again of different kind, like agropine, nopaline, octapine, and so on. But each TI plasmid will have only one opine synthetic gene or opine catabolizing gene. Because so accordingly you can name the TI plasmid as octopine plasmid, nopaline plasmid, and so on. Production of auxin and cytokinin causes plant cells to proliferate and hence form crown galls. As I told you, that if there is an imbalance between the auxin and cytokinin, there will be an abnormality. If the auxin concentration becomes too high, then obviously there will be profuse root formation, and if the cytokinin level is too high as compared to auxin, then there will be the crown gall formation. Okay, so both are kind of cancers, or both are kind of oncogenic effect, and therefore a proper balance between cytokinin and auxin is actually necessary, and that is why they are known as the oncogenes. Now, as I said, the proliferating plant cell, the infected plant cell, they are also secreting certain amino acid derivatives called opines. Mind that these opines are not utilized by the plant, but they are utilized by the bacteria. The plant actually synthesizes them. But again, a healthy plant will not synthesize opine. Only an infected plant cell will synthesize opine, and they will be utilized by the bacterium as carbon and energy sources. Now, octopine, like octopine, it has carboxyethyl derivatives of arginine. Nopaline, it has dicarboxypropyl derivatives of arginine. Agropine, it has bicyclic sugar derivative of glutamic acid. So the most of these octopines, they are some amino acid derivatives, but there are slight differences in their structures or the components. So accordingly, you have the synthesis genes which are present in the tDNA region, that is octopine synthase, nopaline synthase, and so on. And TI plasmids, the nomenclature of TI plasmids are done on the basis of these opines, that is octopine TI plasmid, nopaline TI plasmid, and so on. A bacterial strain, it produces only one type of opine, and it also catabolizes only that opine. For example, if it is a octopine TI plasmid, then there is no question that it will synthesize nopaline, or there is no question that it will utilize nopaline. It will only synthesize and it will only utilize octopine. So it's very much specific. Opine catabolism is regulated by certain other loci, like it can be OCC, it can be NOC, and so on. That is catabolic genes. So the synthesis genes and the catabolic genes, the production and the degradation, for each of these there are separate genes. Now, how does a transformed cell differ from a non-transformed tissue? When you infect a cell with Agrobacterium, then their certain properties get changed. What are those change in properties? It is able to grow autonomously on synthetic media. The symptoms or the phenotypes or the changes are similar to that what happens in case of cancer in human cells, because a cancer cell, it also loses all kind of control. That is, it grows autonomously, or it grows in a very proliferating fashion. Okay, even if you don't apply the important components in the growth media, okay, it is able to proliferate. Here also, it is a phytohormone independent growth. You don't have to provide phytohormones. Okay, you don't have to provide auxin, cytokinin and all. It will grow on like that only. Okay, so this is number one, unlike a normal tissue or a healthy tissue. Number two, plant cells contain one or more of the unusual amino acid derivatives called opines. This is another difference. I told you, healthy cells, they do not have the opines. Only the infected cells, they have the opines, because that is being utilized by the bacteria. So these are the two basic differences. Now, what is meant by genetic colonization? Genetic colonization means, so one thing is very clear, that if I ask, what is the reason that only Agrobacterium tumefaciens is capable of transforming plants? No other bacteria till date have been found to be involved in this plant transformation process. Then there should be something in Agrobacterium tumefaciens which enables it to achieve this quality. And the reason for that is the opine, because opines actually distinguish Agrobacterium from other bacteria in the rhizosphere, because till date Agrobacterium is the only bacteria which is capable of utilizing opines. No other bacteria can utilize opines. So this actually provides Agrobacterium a competitive advantage or a selective advantage over other bacteria. So other bacteria, even if they try to infect the plant, they will not be able to infect the plant in the same fashion, and they cannot be utilized for plant transformation. So this is number one. And number two, this inter-kingdom gene transfer. That is why it is inter-kingdom, because from bacteria, the gene or the vector is being transformed into another system, which is a plant system. So this is something, a beauty, that from a bacteria, you are transferring something to a plant. Normally in conjugation process, we have seen that from a bacteria to another bacteria. But here, from a bacteria to a plant system, a component is being transferred. So this is really a beauty, and this inter-kingdom gene transfer is termed as genetic colonization. So the term genetic colonization, it can have two connotations. One is the issue of the opine utilization, and number two is the inter-kingdom gene transfer. Now, in addition, there are certain chromosomal genes in Agrobacterium, like CHV genes. And as I told, that Agrobacterium needs to attach itself to the wounded site. Whenever there is a wound, the Agrobacterium will undergo chemotactic movement, and therefore it will colonize there, and it will attach to the cell, okay, to the wounded site. And for that, there are certain genes which are called as the chromosomal genes. Like CHVA, as you can see, it's a constitutively expressed non-regulated genes. It encodes an inner membrane protein essential for transport of cyclic beta-1,2-glucan from cytoplasm to periplasm. CHVB, it encodes an inner membrane protein involved in synthesis of beta-1,2-glucan of attachment polysaccharides. CHVD and CHVE, they help in the optimal expression of Wheat genes. I have not come to Wheat genes yet, but you have seen that there is a virulence cassette outside the tDNA region, and that virulence cassette or the stack of virulence genes, there are 8 virulence genes which are working in the form of an operon, that is Vir A to Vir H, Vir A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. There are 8 such genes which are working in a operon fashion, operon system, and that Wheat genes are also regulated by this CHVD and CHVE. In addition, there is an exolocus gene which helps in the biosynthesis of attachment polysaccharides. So, in a nutshell, what I mean to say is that this attachment of the Agrobacterium to the infected cell or to the wounded site is mediated by a set of or a cluster of chromosomal genes. And when the bacteria will attach to the cell wall, we all know that the cell wall has different polysaccharides. It has the cellulose, okay, it has the hemicellulose, it has the pectin, of which the cellulose is the major component, and cellulosic polysaccharides. So the Agrobacterium ultimately it has to attach to those cellulosic polysaccharides, and for that it has this entire set of chromosomal genes. Now we will go into each and every component of the TI plasmid in further details. Now this TI plasmid is a huge plasmid. It is a 200 kilobase pair length plasmid, and it exists as independent replicating genetic units because it has its own origin of replication. So it can autonomously replicate in any system. Okay, and Nopaline TI plasmid, it has a single 23 kilobase pair tDNA region, but Octopine type TI plasmid, it has 2 adjoining regions of 13 kilobase pair left hand piece and 8 kilobase pair right hand piece, of which only the TL region is oncogenic. That means you have to understand that the tDNA region is interrupted. It's not continuous. In case of Nopaline type, it is continuous, but in case of Octopine, it is interrupted, and the auxin and cytokinin regulating genes are present in the TL region, and that is why we call the TL region to be the oncogenic, because by this time probably you have got the idea what is meant by oncogenicity in case of plant system. Nopaline tDNA region, it has 13 ORFs, while Octopine tDNA, it has 8 ORFs in TL and 16 ORF. ORF mean the open reading frames. For Nopaline plasmid, TL and T are transferred together, but in case of Octopine type, they are transferred independently. And what are these oncogenic regions? Oncogenic loci, that is rooty locus or tumor morphology root, which is designated as TMR, and results in tumors developing abnormal roots, and shooty locus or tumor morphology shoot or TMS, which results in tumors with abnormal shoot tissue. So if there is abnormal root formation, you have to understand that it's a hairy root kind of system, or we also call it root mat disease. Or if it is an abnormal shoot tissue, then you have to understand that there is a crown gall formation. Now, mutation of a further morphogenetic locus, TML, it produces larger than normal tumors. So, in case of auxin biosynthesis, what are the genes? AUXA and AUXB, which are also otherwise known as TMS1 or TMS2. And in case of cytokinin production, you have the TMR. It encodes isopentenyl transferase that catalyze isopentyl adenosine 5' monophosphate or cytokinin. So there should be a proper regulation of these genes, because if there is any kind of perturbation in the regulation of these genes, it might lead to an abnormality. Either it might go towards the hairy root formation, or it might go towards the crown gall formation, and that is why these genes are regarded as oncogenes. Another gene, it encodes the enzyme dimethyl allyl pyrophosphate AMP transferase or the DMA transferase. It helps in the covalent linkage of dimethyl allyl pyrophosphate to the N6, nitrogen 6 of adenosine monophosphate, yielding isopentenyl adenosine 5' monophosphate, which is the first cytokinin in the metabolic pathway of this phytohormone. So this is another cytokinin regulating gene, which is also there within the tDNA region. Now we are coming to another issue. So that we have completed discussion on the oncogenes. Now we will come to the next component. If you remember that picture of the TI plasmid, you have seen that the tDNA region is actually the two borders of the tDNA region. You have some border sequences, that is the right tDNA border and the left tDNA border, and we showed that only the tDNA region which is present between the border sequence is transferred. Now how is this possible? And what are actually there in these border sequences? I mean, what these border sequences are actually made up of, and how it is actually occurring. That means only the tDNA region is occurring. So you have to understand that probably there is some sort of mechanism by which there is a cutting, because unless there is a nicking or unless there is a cutting mechanism somewhere, then how can you excise this particular portion so that it can be transferred, and it has to separate from the rest of the TI plasmid. So we will now be discussing about that and what are the different proteins that are actually helping in this cutting or nicking. Now mind that this cutting or nicking will occur only at the right tDNA border and not on the left tDNA border. So it is very clear that the transfer process will be initiated or will be started from the right tDNA region, and it will continue till the transfer process reaches the left tDNA region. All the components within that region will be transferred. So whatever gene you need to clone or whatever gene you need to transfer to the plant to make a transgenic, to create a transgenic, has to be housed within the tDNA region and not outside, because otherwise those will not be transferred. So the site of endonuclease action during tDNA transfer is the 24 base pair highly conserved directly repeated tDNA sequences that flanks and delimits the tDNA. So tDNA is separated from the rest of the TI plasmid by the presence of these border sequences. And it is the right tDNA border is the site of the endonuclease action. And as I said, any sequence between these will be transferred. Okay. The TL region of octopine PTI, genes for auxin and cytokinin biosynthesis. TR region, it has genes for agropine and manopine synthesis. Okay. And then the region outside the tDNA, we have seen that there is a 40 kilobase pair virulence region or the VIR genes. And there are 8 operons, as I said, VIR A to VIR H, and they are co-regulated, and therefore we call it an operon system. They are co-transcribed. Now, these virulence genes, they are not transferred to the plant. They don't gain entry into the plant. Then you must be wondering what is their utility. If they are not transferred in the plant system, then what is their utility? Why they are required? They are required for the transfer process. They help in the transfer process, but itself they don't get transferred into the system. Now we have to look at how they are helping in this transfer process. Like VIR A, VIR B, VIR D, VIR G, these are essential for virulence, and the rest of the VIR genes, they play an accessory role. VIR A and VIR G, they make up a two-component regulatory system important for transcriptional activation of the remaining VIR genes and to some extent their own increased activation. VIR regions are located outside the tDNA region. Now, whenever there is an wounding, okay, so this wounding actually it induces the VIR genes, and there are certain chemicals which are released from the wounded site, which are known as the acetylseringon or beta hydroxyacetylseringon or alpha hydroxyacetylseringon. Now, why the Agrobacterium it actually gets mobilized or it actually undergoes chemotactic movement? Because in response to these signaling molecules, so from the soil it will go to the wounded site, because wounding it induces the virulence genes, and two of the most active substances are identified, and the VIR-A is a product of the periplasmic membrane protein that senses these phenolic components. So they are phenolic sensors, and in response to that, Agrobacterium actually mobilizes, it moves, or it undergoes the chemotactic movement. VIR-A is a phenolic sensor autokinase and is a receptor for acetylseringon. So there is an autophosphorylation of VIR-A, and thereafter, after it undergoes this phosphorylation mechanism, it transfers the phosphate group to the VIR-G, and therefore VIR-G gets activated. So VIR-A is an autokinase, there is an autophosphorylation, and thereafter it transfers the phosphate group to VIR-G, VIR-G gets activated. And it is a transcription factor, which means that several genes are under the control of VIR-G. That is, when VIR-G gets activated, there are several downstream VIR genes. Which are those downstream VIR genes? That means other than VIR-A and VIR-G. All the downstream VIR genes, they are directly regulated by VIR-G, and therefore we call them as a VIR box. And a series of VIR genes, they are being transcribed one after the other to regulate the DNA transfer process, or the tDNA transfer process. So VIR-A is a phenolic sensor and an autokinase, and VIR-G is a transcription factor which gets activated by phosphorylation. Now, VIR-B1 to B11, these are membrane proteins which help in the transfer process by acting as the transfer apparatus for the tDNA transfer process, and they form a channel for the tDNA transport. VIR-B11, it has ATPase activity, because for this transfer process, successful transfer process, it needs energy, and that energy, it comes from ATP hydrolysis, and VIR-B11 it has an ATPase activity. VIR-C is a helicase and an overdrive binding protein. Overdrive sequences are present just outside the right borders, and these overdrive sequences are recognized by VIR-C, which is a helicase, and that is why probably the reason that the transfer process starts from the right border and not the left border. It is because of the presence of these overdrive sequences which are present near the right borders and which are being recognized by VIR-C, which has a helicase activity. And helicase means that there is an unwinding of DNA. So from the double-stranded DNA, it has to get converted to the single-stranded form before the transfer process is being initiated. And that occurs exclusively at the right tDNA region. VIR-D1, it has a topoisomerase activity which binds to the right border of the tDNA required for tDNA processing. VIR-D2 has an endonuclease activity. This is very important because, as I said, that there is a nicking, there is a cutting at the right DNA border, and it directs tDNA through VIR-B, VIR-D4 transfer apparatus. Like in case of conjugation, you have a conjugation bridge. Okay, here you don't call it a conjugation bridge, but here also you need some kind of transfer apparatus. You need some kind of channel through which the DNA has to transfer, and that transfer apparatus is made of VIR-B or VIR-D4. Now, when you undergo Agrobacterium transformation, you have to understand that the DNA will enter directly into the nucleus. It does not go into mitochondria and chloroplast. Why? Because all these VIR genes, they have certain nuclear localization signals. And when the DNA is being transferred from the Agrobacterium to the plant cell, there are certain VIR genes which will also bind to them. Okay? And they will ensure that the DNA is being mobilized, or the DNA gains entry into the nucleus and not on any other subcellular organelles like mitochondria or chloroplast, because they also have the DNA in multiple copies. But transformation through Agrobacterium is a nuclear transformation, meaning that the DNA will enter only into the nuclear genome, integrated into the nuclear genome. And for that, these VIR genes, some of the VIR genes are responsible, like VIR-D2. So VIR-D2 has a number of activities to play. Karyofurin alpha, cyclophilins, PP2Cs are the interacting proteins involved in the transfer of proteins through the nuclear pore complex. So VIR-D1 and VIR-D2, they provide an endonuclease system which initiates the nicking process. They produce single-stranded nicks at specific sites in DNA. nicking takes place between the third and fourth base of the bottom strand of each 25 base pair repeat. A nick at the right border 25 base pair repeat provides a priming end, and synthesis of new DNA strand begins from this nick in 5' to 3' direction. So the transfer has to occur in a single stranded form, and after the transfer process is being done, then there is a reformation of the DNA synthesis. That means again this nick site will act as the priming site for the synthesis of the new DNA strand. So the DNA transfer process, it occurs in a single stranded form. VD2 becomes covalently attached to the 5' end of the displaced single-stranded tDNA strand. Presence of VD2 makes the 5' end of the T strand less vulnerable to an attack by exonuclease. So it is an endonuclease attack at the right tDNA region. Outside the tDNA, immediately adjacent to the right border, as I already mentioned, that there are some short sequence called overdrive sequences, and VC1 and VC2, they actually recognize these overdrive sequences, and therefore, as I said, that the transfer process, it starts from the right border and not the left border. tDNA VD2 complex cross the plasma membrane to the cytoplasm. The tDNA strand is covered with VE2. What is the function of this VE2? VE2 actually protects the tDNA from nucleases, because see, this tDNA region is entering into a foreign system, that is plant, and the plant will try to actually degrade any kind of foreign material. Any system, it tries to degrade anything which is recognized as foreign. So there will be a tendency for the plant cell to degrade the foreign DNA, but that is not done. That is not possible. Why? Because VE2 is there. VE2 actually protects the tDNA so that they are not degraded in the plant system, and it facilitates the nuclear localization process. VE2 is also a 69 kilodalton single-stranded binding protein, and 600 copies of such VE2 binds to the single-stranded tDNA region, and even this VE2, it has 2 nuclear localization signals. And in addition, VE2 has also another interacting protein, that is VIP1. This VIP1 also interacts with VE2, and together they actually enable the entire transfer process. So see, the tDNA is not transferred alone. There are several additional VIR proteins which bind to the tDNA region, okay, and enables it to get transferred through the transfer apparatus via the nuclear pore complex, via the nuclear membrane, and then enter into the nucleus to be integrated or to be incorporated in the nuclear genome. So it's a beautiful kind of mechanism. It's a well orchestrated mechanism which is regulated by a series of VIR genes. Okay, and VIP1 and VE3 facilitate interaction between VE2 and karyofurin alpha, which transports VE2 into the nucleus. VE2 gives correct conformation to the tDNA strand. Another VIR gene, that is VIRF, it is a bacterial F-box protein, and it helps in VIP1 and VE2 degradation by proteasomal machinery. So this is almost towards the end where VIRF actually works. Once the tDNA region has entered into the nucleus and is going to be integrated into the nuclear genome, then there is no requirement for these VIR proteins. There is no further requirement of these VIR proteins. So these VIR proteins need to be degraded, and therefore there is this VIR gene, that is, or VIR protein, that is VIRF, which actually targets these VIR proteins to undergo proteasomal degradation process, and these proteins are finally degraded. So the entire process or the entire integration of the tDNA region, it occurs by illegitimate recombination, unlike homologous recombination. So you can see that what are the different functions of VIR genes, and in addition it also has VIRH, which consists of 2 genes which has a role in the detoxification of certain plant compounds that might adversely affect the growth of Agrobacterium. So this is actually the entire Agrobacterium biology, where you have learnt about the oncogenes. you have learnt about the opines, you have learnt about the roles of the different virulence genes which act from outside. They do not gain entry into the system, but even if they gain entry into the system, they are ultimately degraded. Okay, their main task is to enable the tDNA region to get transferred and to get integrated. That is the main purpose of weed genes. You have learnt about the utility of the border sequences. What are there actually in these border sequences, and who actually recognizes these border sequences, how the nicking process is occurring, and then how the transfer process actually stops at the left tDNA border sequences. So with this picture in mind, now if you are given in your laboratory to undergo a plant transformation process using Agrobacterium tumefaciens culture, then how will you go, or what are the steps? Okay, so before going into the laboratory part, if we just try to summarize what are the steps. Number one, there is a signal recognition. Signal recognition by the Agrobacterium, that is from the wounded site there are certain chemicals which are released which will be recognized by Agrobacterium. Then it will attach to the plant cells. We have already seen attachment via polysaccharides. Cellulosic fibers are there to which the Agrobacterium cells will attach. Then there will be the induction of the virulence genes in response to the chemical molecules secreted like acetylseringon or alpha hydroxyacetylseringon, which is released from the wounded site. There will be the weed gene triggering. Then there will be the T-strand production. Then the left border and right border sequences will be recognized. Then there will be a cutting or single-stranded nicks at the VD2 locus, and then the VD2 will become covalently attached to the 5' end of the displaced single-stranded tDNA strand, and several other Vir proteins will actually bind. Several Vir proteins will form the transfer apparatus and so on. Finally, the tDNA transfer process will occur, and the tDNA VD2 complex is exported from the bacterial cell by T pilus, like we call as the sex pilus in case of conjugation. Here we call it as a T pilus, composed of proteins encoded by VB operon, and VD4E2 and VREF are also exported from the bacterial cell. So those are actually the different steps. In a nutshell, the steps for the Agrobacterium transformation. Now, what is the obvious advantage of Agrobacterium transformation? They are capable of infecting. You are capable of you can infect intact cells, tissues, and organs with rapid regeneration. Then they induce less rearrangement of transgene. Like in case of direct gene transfer, particle bombardment, there occurs rearrangement. Here there is less rearrangement. Lower transgene copy number and stable integration and expression. So these are certain advantages for which people normally choose Agrobacterium tumefaciens-mediated transformation. What are the important factors that need to be considered? Like the plant tissue that you are transforming, that has to be competent. It should be a healthy plant tissue. It should not have abnormality. It should not be diseased. Number two, the vectors should be derivatives of TI with only left border and right border, and it should have selectable markers because you have to undergo antibiotic selection. It should have the origin of replication like any other vector. But Agrobacterium tumefaciens also has certain shortcomings. It has a limited host range because for a long time people actually succeeded in Agrobacterium tumefaciens transformation only with the dicot plant, not in monocot. Why? Because the dicot plant, they secrete a larger amount of that is acetylseringon or alpha hydroxyacetylseringon. But for monocots, the concentration or the level of these sensors are very less, and therefore it is very difficult to undergo rice transformation or any monocot transformation using Agrobacterium. But the dicots have they secrete this kind of molecules or metabolites to a higher extent. So for monocots, you have to supply this kind of sensors into the growth media from outside if you are to go for successful transformation. Sometimes there are certain cells that are able to regenerate but are difficult to transform. So in this case, you can actually regenerate them, okay, but you cannot transform them easily, but they are easy for regeneration. The reverse also is there, okay, where the transformation process is easy, but the regeneration of the explant, okay, the transformed explant is difficult. So those kind of things need to be considered. Then, as I said, in case of monocots, there are certain secondary metabolites like DIMBOA which are released, which actually inhibits the growth of Agrobacterium. And lack of wound response from monocot tissue, because dicots, they secrete a higher amount of the phenolic sensors, as I said. Certain strains of Agrobacterium which you use, like LBA4404, you can use it for, this is a very routine, it's a strain which is routinely used for transformation. And in case of monocots, as I said, that they need additional super virulent strains for transformation, like EHA101 or EHA105, because they have extra copies of virulence genes. Okay, so in case of monocot, it's better to go for these strains, whereas in case of dicot, you can use anyone, like in tobacco transformation or any dicot species, if you, or Arabidopsis, or in case of, let's say, tobacco particularly, you can use LBA4404. In case of rice or any other monocots, you can use this kind of EHA101 or 105. Now, when you are doing this transformation in a lab, what you do is, like, you prepare small leaf discs, which are, you surface sterilize a leaf and you prepare small leaf discs. You infect the leaf discs with the Agrobacterium culture, okay, and grow them to certain OD. And then if they release acetylsyringon, it's fine. Otherwise, you apply in the media the acetylsyringon. The explants are blood dried and transferred to the culture media. Then there will be multiplication. And then after co-cultivation, that is growing the Agrobacterium to the infected tissue, what you do is, like 48 hours growth, you apply a bacteriostatic agent, that is cefotaxime or carbenicillin, and then the transformed calli are, then the bacteria are killed, and then the transformed calli are, they are placed on the antibiotic media for regeneration of the plant tissue, and then when the plant is regenerated, they are hardened and they are transferred to the greenhouse condition, and then you can undergo all the molecular analysis. I am not talking of those molecular analysis because those have already been discussed in one of my earlier sessions. How do you actually check a transgenic plant? That is through southern hybridization, through RT-PCR or northern blot, you check the gene expression, and through western blot, you check the protein expression. So I am not repeating the same thing again and again. Okay, so with this picture in our background, I think today what we discussed is the main Agrobacterium tumefaciens-mediated transformation. What are the different components? How will you undergo an Agrobacterium transformation in the laboratory condition? In addition, I would like to say that there are certain other modified techniques like floral dip method or vacuum infiltration method. These are also upcoming techniques, or these are also being simultaneously practiced with Agrobacterium. Particularly the floral dip method, what happens is, supposing you have an inflorescence and you dip the inflorescence in the Agrobacterium culture. So here you don't need to cut or to cut a plant tissue to make an explant. So you can directly dip the flowers or the inflorescence part in the Agrobacterium culture, okay, and you can use vacuum infiltration method, or you can use any surfactant, sucrose and surfactant, for this transformation process, and then you generate the seeds. Okay, after transformation, you generate the seeds, you harvest the seeds and grow them in the selection media, that is in the antibiotic selection media, and you regenerate the transformed plants. So here you don't need any kind of dissection, or you don't need any kind of cutting. So those kind of techniques, advanced techniques, are coming up with the Agrobacterium tumefaciens, and many laboratories are undergoing those kind of techniques. But for you students or learners, you should focus mostly on the Agrobacterium biology, Agrobacterium transformation, and the main components, that is the TI plasmid of Agrobacterium tumefaciens. So with this, I thank you all for very patient hearing, and in case of any inquiry and in case of any problem, okay, you are free to contact us, you are free to write us, you are free to email us, and I wish you all a very, very happy learning. Please go through this Agrobacterium biology very carefully. Thank you.
Welcome to the session. Today I am going to discuss the erstwhile Prevention of Food Adulteration Act and rules. As we